It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is episode number 22 of Beneath the Helmet. I just want to start off with thanking everyone for being part of this journey. 22 episodes with some amazing individuals and thought leaders across North America and the world. Today is going to be another powerhouse, knowledge-packed episode for you to binge on. Today, I'm joined with a registered psychologist, advocate for well-being of first responders, professor at UBC, co-founder of Blueprint NGO, and the co-developer of the First Responder Resiliency Program here in BC. Today, I'm lucky enough to share my conversation with Dr. Duncan Shields. Today, October 10th, as this podcast is being released, is World Mental Health Day. And as we all know, mental health is an everyday activity, but in honor of this day, I am excited to share our conversation with Dr. Duncan Shields. We explore several key areas for first responder well-being and health, and how we can co-create high-performing organizations and teams. We explore the need to pay closer attention to the post-recovery of those experiencing mental health and trauma challenges, along with some strategies to be optimal, high-performing firefighters and humans. Dr. Shields is a well-known BC advocate for first responder well-being and has worked with men strengthening their role of fathers and father figures in children's lives. This is an episode that really resonated with me, as Dr. Duncan Shields covers several areas that I've grown to be very passionate about over the last few years. So please enjoy this knowledge-filled episode with Dr. Shields in episode 22 of Beneath the Helmet. Until next time, stay well. All right, we got Dr. Duncan Shields with us today. Welcome to the show, Duncan.
Thanks very much. Great to be on the show, Arjuna.
Thank you. So tell our listeners a bit of who Dr. Shields is and kind of where you came from and what brought you to what you're doing today.
Yeah, it's been a meandering path, as they often are. So I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, and I've got an appointment, an adjunct professorship with the faculty of medicine at the University of British Columbia, and that's really where I spend most of my time. Working with first responder organizations on trying to understand organizational and operational stress and really how to keep people functioning at their very best and staying well. So that interest goes back a very, very long way for me. My mother was a nurse who served on ambulances in the 1950s Toronto. And so I know PTSD from the family perspective as well. I know what those family conversations at the dinner table entail. And I had a brief time in uniform as well as an infantry reservist. I didn't do anything of any consequence at that point in uniform, but it really did give me an appreciation for service and sacrifice in uniform. So,
as soon as you became a psychologist, was first responders kind of your natural draw, or did that evolve over time?
it really evolved over time. It's kind of the natural draw was more military. Certainly, that was where I felt like I had an inside, certainly knowledge of the culture and some of the pressures within. And so I was really working with military veterans, adjusting to coming home after deployment or after service, and transitioning out of military careers into civilian roles. That was really where things started for me, and it was a natural fit. And it was really invitations. Because, what do you do after a military career? Well, sometimes first responder roles become kind of a natural fit. So you carry on service to the community in some other uniform. And it was actually a firefighter, Tony Speece, who I'd met and helped really develop a veterans transition program in Canada. And he became a firefighter and really invited me to come in and partner with the BC Professional Firefighters Association to try and build something upstream that would keep people well.
Beautiful. Well, I know the work you're doing is truly making a difference in the fire service community and the first responder community. The dedication that you have towards our well-being is outstanding. So I just want to say kudos to you for everything you're doing in the world to help us survive and thrive a bit better. So thank you.
Well, it's really, they say in consulting that good clients make you look really good. And really it's kudos to us in some ways, because it's if there's any magic, it's in the collaboration, because it's really been rolling up our sleeves together and trying to figure out how we can leverage certainly what I know, but in a world that I don't know. And being really coming together to problem solve. How do we transfer the skills out of a therapist's office? How do we transfer the theory out of my office, out of the expert language that it's often couched in, and make it relevant, deployable in real time of first responders' lives? And I can't do that on my own. I need help translating that. And that's where, starting with BC firefighters and then going on to BC police officers, municipal police officers. I've had some really good partners to help shape something that is really, not built for you, but built with you.
So I know you're involved in several programs. You want to talk about some of those, like the Blueprint thing there? You want to share a little plug for them?
Sure. I guess the two main programs relevant here are our work doing a first responder resiliency program, which is really a program that's accessible. It's a 4-day residential program that we run up at UBC's forestry grounds. It's called Loon Lake. What an appropriate name. Anyways, but we run that program for firefighters, and a separate program for police officers at any point in their career, where you can come in and really take a step outside of the busyness of life to look at where you are and the impact of service and life on you, where there's a gap between how you want it to show up in life and the results you might be getting, and how you might be showing up in relationships and at your work, and really thinking about recalibrating and being able to carry your experiences differently and go back to your life and make a change and sort of close the distance between where you want it to be and where you are, what you're achieving. So those are two programs that Movember has very generously funded for 2 years, 14 programs for police and 14 for fire. And and so a lot of my time and energy is about thinking through, how do we take 4 days and make it count, make it create a lasting change for people that's durable in their lives.
I think it was episode number 9 on Beneath the Helmet. We had Steve Farina come on and tell us a lot about that program as well. So it's nice to hear that it's got such high regards among the first responder community.
Well, Steve is one of the chief architects and one of the people the first person that Tony Spees introduced me to was Steve Farina.
Yeah.
And Steve just sort of welcomed me in as a member of the family with open arms, and that's been the kind of the quality of the relationship ever since. And it's in so many of these things, it's the quality of the relationship that determines the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree more. So coming in as a psychologist, was there any learning about the culture that surprised you at the fire service?
Absolutely. It was a bit humbling, because at the time that I met Steve and really started this project and this collaboration. You have to remember, I've been a trauma therapist for probably about 22 years at the time, and so I was a good 20,000 hours in terms of creating individual therapy spaces and helping largely uniform population how to make sense. Psychologists are last responders, so we come in, after things have been cleaned up, sometimes months, sometimes years later, as people try and make sense of their experiences and they kind of integrate those experiences or digest them. And so I've been doing that for about 20,000 hours at the time. So I thought I knew quite a bit. But the first thing that we did, and we work at Blueprint, we work with this idea of nothing about you without you. So we're not going to go away and create something for firefighters without firefighters really informing. And so the very first step was to sit down with 30 firefighters from I think 2 years on the job to 31 years on the job, and really look at what are the what are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What are the impediments to self-care? What are the barriers to really taking care of each other? And it was those interviews and then the same thing in the 25 police officers when we built the police program. And in both of those cases, it was a truly humbling experience. I sat down with some very generous individuals who were willing to share their story with me, and I was astounded by how little I knew, uh, by how little I knew about the day-to-day work and the sheer volume of exposure to the worst of what happens to human beings, the worst of what we do to each other, the worst of what we do to ourselves, and and uh, and so that cumulative effect, it was really an exposure to that part of the work, and the fact that you're, unlike military where you deploy away and you come back home for the most part, this idea that people deploy for a lifetime and then they raise their kids and they have recreation in the same geography, at the same mall parking lot and that bridge and that crossroads. The geography of your exposure to trauma is the same place where you're living in your lifetime. That really hit home in a very different way.
Interesting. So, from my perspective, it seems to be the fire service and probably other first responder agencies seem to draw in a certain character of firefighter or first responder,
Mm.
with maybe a tendency for some previous trauma. Do you know if there's any research on that or any thoughts on that they're coming in already with rocks in their backpack into the fire service that's going to add a whole lot of rocks as well? Is there any studies on that or?
Certainly, it appears to be that way anecdotally. It appears to be. I'm not aware of any. There probably has been studies on that,
Mhm.
but certainly anecdotally, that's my experience. And it's an interesting thing because I in those initial interviews with firefighters came up with this concept of, well, I and the civilian world live within this kind of bubble of relative safety and security. And we're protected from exposure from a lot of the chaos, the danger, the fragility of life. The worst of what happens to human beings, or we do to ourselves or each other. That, right? So that a lot of us live within that. There's a few of us will put on a uniform and sort of take on roles at the surface of the bubble, protecting civilian life from exposure to much of that. But then, as you say, that there's another group of individuals who never grew up in the bubble. They never had safety and security. They grew up in chaos and unpredictability and exposure to sometimes the worst of what people do to each other. And that's a really special group of individuals. You can imagine that how service impacts you over time is going to be very much influenced by where you came from. And I find that people who have grown up without safety and security, this is a special group of individuals because rather than passing along that chaos, these are people who are making a value statement. They're saying, "I want to be part of the solution," and so we see that history of trauma works both ways. We see a very, very high incidence of called ACE events or adverse childhood events, ACEs. We see those in people with significant addictions, and so that history of abuse or trauma or unpredictability or chaos can really take us off track for life. But we also see that kind of background, a high incidence of that in high performing athletes or Olympic athletes, and we see a high incidence of it anecdotally again in first responder populations, and so it does tend to focus people on, I want to make a difference. I want to be part of the change. I want to be part of the solution rather than the problem. And so it is a very common backstory. It's not universal, but it's a very common backstory and motivation for people going into first responder and military roles.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful in one regard of, they're here to be of service. But on the flip side, I guess we got to pay extra attention to as leaders, as organizations, to make psychologically safe environments as much as possible, because they're going into these incidents that are going to be traumatic over their career, their time in the fire service. So I think building
Absolutely.
that psychologically safe environment gives them, and I think all of us, the best shot of surviving and thriving in the fire service.
Absolutely. On the one hand, it equips people to go into those scenes because they're in some ways comfortable in chaos, right? And so they're prepared in that way, in a different way than people who have lived in safety and security might actually have a different step to take.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, it also becomes this kind of variable where if you've got enough, it's one of the formulas for post-trauma reactions is you could have the one big event. They call it in psychology, call it an index event, one big traumatizing event that sort of switches the brain over into safety mode, where you don't go back into safe and secure. Instead, you stay in vigilance and on guard as if the world is always going to be unsafe. That is the post-trauma reaction. So one big index event causes that. We know that an accumulation over a career can cause that, but also if you've had early childhood experiences and then later life, that's also part of the formula for switching you over into that kind of survival mode, to be scanning and vigilant and unable to sort of come down again. You're always up and ready. You're always facing the door, ready for what's coming.
So I wonder if those people would be more resilient than the ones who lived in safety and security their whole life, because they jump into the fire service, so they don't get to see that trauma, and that's maybe the first time they've ever experienced trauma day after day after day. Do you think there's any correlation there that maybe that population is maybe a bit more resilient in that regard?
Well, I think it depends in part on context, right?
Mm.
So we all carry a certain herd wiring. We don't arrive on the scene just kind of brand new. We're all carrying the wiring from a couple 100,000 for Homo sapiens, 200,000 years of evolutionary inheritance, and then everything that goes before that, and all of that is sort of present in this kind of layering of the brain from the reptilian, this old kind of body mediator responses of fight, flight, freeze, flop, take cover, that kind of really sort of not language, not nuanced kind of response to a predator-prey environment, and makes sense in a predator-prey environment. And then the kind of limbic response, the kind of emotional valence system that helps us move towards or move away with preferences and likes and fears and anger and all of this stuff that helps navigate. And then this much later developing neocortex and prefrontal cortex, where we have language and logic and nuanced problem solving and social skills. That kind of layering of the brain, we've got this little technology that's there, that's ready at a moment's notice to take over and respond to the environment with this kind of body mediated response. And so if you've come from it in childhood, it's in there and it could be cued. But equally, if you come from safety and security, it's in there. And depending on the context we put you in, what are the calls? What's the volume of the calls? What's the nature of it? And the nature, not just in terms of, some kind of horrific call that's kind of the obvious one. We always think when we think of trauma, we think of these kind of horrific calls, and certainly those are potentially traumatizing, but equally traumatizing are the ones where you show up and there's something in the scene that you couldn't predict and you couldn't guard against, but it just collapses the boundary between, your professional self and your personal self. And suddenly, the difficult scene with a toddler, but this time it's the toddler's wearing the pajamas of your son at home. And suddenly there's this collapse between the professional and the personal, and it sits there. Or you look up and you see the family pictures, or you hear the family in the other room. And something makes that stick. And it's not the horror, it's something that makes it personal and meaningful. And now you're carrying it entirely differently. And so we can't guard against those things. So we tend to overemphasize kind of individual factors, and we forget that the context that we get people into is also very, very important in terms of the impact on it.
I find this stuff so interesting. It's a passion of mine. I'm nowhere even close to, considering myself well knowledgeable in this area, but it's something that I just love studying about now. I think how the brain operates under stress is just so fascinating.
there's actually a wonderful story. This is from Captain Kurt West from Uniformed Services in the U.S. and he likens he has this goldfish metaphor, and it's a great story about how we think about resilience. And so he says basically the way we think about resilience is like if you've ever gone as a kid and you go to the store to buy a goldfish and you bring it home in a plastic bag, right? Mm-hmm. It's experience that a lot of kids have. So you say, well, you go to the store and you choose the most resilient, the strongest goldfish. And so whatever your criteria is, maybe you look at their childhood, I don't know, but you choose the fastest swimmers or the biggest ones or the ones with the nicest scales, right? Or maybe you choose the ones with the shredded fins because they've been chased and survived. Like whatever your criteria, but you're going to choose the very best goldfish that you can, and then you bring them home with these kind of excellent, these top-notch goldfish, and you drop them one by one because remember you're looking for the most resilient ones. You drop them one by one in a bowl of boiling water, and it's like, and then you scratch your head when they don't survive, when they succumb to the environment. You scratch your head and you go, well, maybe there was something in their childhood we didn't identify. Maybe we have to clarify our selection criteria, because if we can get the selection criteria right, then it doesn't matter what context we get them into. No matter how hot the water is, they should be just fine. And it's a great story because of course that's madness. Like that's nuts. Of course, the temperature of the water matters. And yet when we select first responders for the rule, we tend to fall back into that goldfish model where we just think if we can get the selection criteria right, 100%. Then it doesn't matter about context. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter about call volume. It doesn't matter about, we can add on an opioid epidemic. We can add on COVID pandemic. We can add on call volume. We can add in shortage of services, complexity of calls, tasking people with things that are outside of their, outside of their kind of wheelhouse. And that's going to be okay. Right. And of course it's not. Context is a critical factor to consider, both in terms of what affects people, but also in terms of how do you keep people well. So it's an under leveraged kind of aspect of care.
That's a great story. That definitely resonates with me anyways. And I'm sure the listeners will resonate with that as well. As, the fire service culture. We haven't really dug too deep into that yet. Of, like you say, it's all about the grades, how fit they are for the entry test, how they do on their interview. But have we looked at the organization itself as a key to keeping people safe and thriving, right?
Yeah. Because generally, it's like you look at first responder populations at the recruit level, firefighter, this is not a normal population, right? This is actually a really fit and very well population. And yet we know. And so, that the highest risk is not actually coming in the door. Actually, people coming in the door are functioning pretty well. I mean, they have an adjustment, but it's actually the last 5 to 10 years of the career where people are most at risk. Because the complexity, I mean, it's not just the first 5 years you're learning the operational, you're learning the calls, you're adjusting to the calls. Mm-hmm. But then in your next 5 years, between 5 and 10 years, you've got an added complexity probably in some kind of your domestic world and relationships. And maybe there's a marriage, maybe there's kids, maybe there's other things happening. And so you still got the calls, still got the operational issues, but then you've got domestic issues as well. And then the next 5 years, between 10 and 15, you might add, you're going from promotion, you're more exposed to the politics of the organization. And so you still got the operational calls, you got the domestic issues that may be adding in complexity and, financial responsibility, all the things that are happening there. But now you've got organizational stress as well. And then you go from, 15 to 20 years, and now you've got this accumulation. You still got the operational stress. You've got domestic stuff going on. You've got organizational stuff, probably all of that, domestics impinging at work, and work is impinging at home. And so you've got all of that. Plus you've got, compassion fatigue, moral injury, cumulative effects of trauma. And so the load is actually increasing over the career. So where, we tend to, be most concerned about the newbie, right? And the people who are sort of, more experienced are there thinking that they've got the answer. But in actual fact, they need to look around because the greatest load is being carried actually by those later in career.
I can 100% relate to that because in my short 24 years, I went from being a volunteer firefighter to being a fire chief, a career fire chief. And that steep incline of learning and responsibility and everything, it took a toll on me for sure. So there's
Absolutely.
benefits of promoting early and going through that whole fire service early, but there's also a downside to going that fast through the fire service,
Yeah,
experiencing change after change after change, right? So
that's right. There's no opportunity to
mhm,
sort of take a break and recalibrate and even be the speed of service, the momentum of life often keeps us from being able to step back and reflect and be strategic about our own, where are we?
yeah,
Where am I? How am I
got it.
doing? How are my relationships?
Yeah.
Am I where I want to be? Are the changes that people are signaling, people who knew me before I went into this work, are they signaling that there's some change? Are the important people in my life signaling that there are changes happening that I need to pay attention to? And the momentum of life often pushes us right through that so that we don't have an opportunity to be reflective and therefore an opportunity to be strategic. So we're just living life reactively, just
Mhm.
taking one challenge after the next challenge after the next challenge. So
The other word that comes to mind is integration. No time for integration.
no time for integration.
Mhm,
And sometimes no value placed on integration,
mhm,
right? Value placed on suppression, value placed on putting blinders on and only focus on going forward.
mhm,
Right? It's just like it's like sharks. You gotta be swimming forward in order to breathe or something. There's
mhm,
some fish that has to
mhm.
swim forward. Needs movement to breathe, kind of thing.
Yep, yep, yep.
And the impact of that, of course, is that then people reach something stops you, whether it's an injury or retirement or the variety of things that stop the momentum of life. And it's like everything that you've been throwing back into the back of the truck and driving quickly, and it's all back there and safely back there. And then the brakes go on, and guess what? All of that stuff that was in the back is now sitting in the cab with you, and you're dealing with it all at once.
Mhm.
And so that when is that going to happen? And how can you prepare for that and actually create strategic moments to step outside. Like that's what our resiliency program is. Basically, it's 4 days to get outside of the hustle of your life, to reflect on where you've come from and where you want it to go, and make a course correction. Right? We don't get a lot of opportunity to do that. And when you give people the opportunity to do that and some tools to recalibrate and re-enter their life in a different way, people can do phenomenal things with that.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, we spend most of our time externally and very little time inward, right? I think that's
That's
pretty
right.
pretty critical. You brought up moral injury like a few minutes ago, and I really truly feel that's a brink of a epidemic. I personally feel there's a lot of people suffering from moral injury across first world world, but also in civilian life as well. Maybe give us our viewers because not everyone's familiar with what moral injury is. We've had a couple of podcasts that talk about it, but what would
Mhm.
be your perspective of moral injury and how it's impacting maybe the fire service?
If we really sort of simplify it in some ways, it's where duty requires you to act in ways that don't align with your own values and sense of morality. An obvious or an easy example of that, or maybe a less obvious example of that, is simply where uh, that you could provide care, or you could save a life, or you could do something, and yet the resources that you have at your disposal, the system is not allowing you to actually provide care that you'd like to give. And so there's this kind of you can't do what you really know you could do if you had the resources. And so that's a potentially morally injurious event. I think about firefighters in the heat dome last year. Like this resulted in a kind of moral injury where the system just couldn't accommodate the number of people who needed to be transported. And so there was quite a number of firefighters who were left watching people succumb to the heat, people dying in front of them. That that they, if they could get them to the hospital, that there would have been a different outcome. but the system just was buckling under the pressure. And so what do you do when you see this kind of needless suffering and there's nothing that you can do? And so those are very real. It's very real world kind of circumstances that take a toll. And you can go away from those with a real sense of eroded meaning and purpose, a sense of hopelessness and helplessness and cynicism that can creep in. And when the meaning and purpose of what you're doing starts to be eroded, then it starts to be a sacrifice without payoff. It seems just to be a cost rather than also being, the best career in the world. The meaningfulness and purpose and that sense of fulfillment that you get from being able to make a difference, when that's eroded, it's more difficult to go to work.
You know if moral injury is considered a occupational injury, or is that not the case yet?
It's not I don't think it's in the diagnostic code
The
as of
DSM?
yet, but it's certainly it's something that's a subject of a lot of research, and so it is a thing, right?
Right.
It's a very real thing that we're gaining more and more understanding. It's not my area of specialty, certainly, but it's something that I think is very, very important to take seriously and look at.
I agree. So, what can today's leaders do a bit better to build a psychologically safe environment, to build an environment that fosters firefighter well-being from hire to retire?
I think that one of the things that we're in transition. I think we're in a time of transition because I think that there's a lot more interest and willingness to look at mental health in the workplace and to look at what can we do to keep people safe and keep people well over their career. But as of yet, we're still not. We still have this kind of, there's the operations, and then there's mental health, and they're these two separate things. And so it's like we turn towards mental health when it becomes an issue, but then we turn back to operations, and so they're not seen as being necessarily on the same path. That actually mental health is an integral part of being able to operate efficiently, operate at a very, very high level. That mental health, mental well-being is not understood as a way of actually increasing response time. It's not seen as a way of reducing accidents on the job. It's not seen as a way of really allowing people to actually perform at their very, very best. And so it's we're still using a kind of brokenness model, and the language doesn't matter what kind of language mental health professionals put on it. We can talk about depression, moral injury, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or we can use the sort of in-between language of operational stress injury. But the language of the front line is often not fit, broken, weak, right? And so it gets translated into this kind of, am I fit or am I not? And so there's this kind of black and white thinking about it that results in this idea that I'm going to be operationally fit and able and ready, or if I have to attend to my mental health, it's because I'm not operationally fit and able, rather than I attend to it so that I can maintain that kind of operational fitness and readiness. It makes sense.
100%. Well, it's just like going to the gym every day, pumping iron, so you can be physically ready for performance. We have to have the same mindset that we have to be mentally prepared for high performance.
It's actually a way better metaphor. It's because if we think we're using a rehab metaphor for mental health, it's like I'm fit and then I'm broken and then I go for services, or then I pay attention to my mental health. And to take in a fitness metaphor, to translate that into a fitness metaphor is much more useful to say, I go to the gym, I work on my fitness in order to maintain my mobility, my strength, all of the things that I need in order to live the life that I want to live. If we transfer that way of thinking, and so your fitness, comes and goes. It's like there are things that enhance it, and there are things that erode it. Tell a story. COVID-19 eroded my physical fitness because I used to go to the gym every week. I worked with a trainer once a week, and that was a great antidote. to my work where I sit for a living, right? So that ability to move. And then COVID came along and closed down all the gyms. And so I lost a lot of my fitness, and I still haven't regained it. So that there are things that come in from the environment, from context that you can erode it. But then there are things that I can do to start to regain it and to enhance it. And ultimately, while your physical fitness can be better at times or eroded, or right, so it's this kind of moving target that's shifting and changing all the time. Ultimately, it's going to be the outcome of practice. It's going to be the outcome of daily practice, of weekly practice, of having a plan where you're actually working on it. And so, you say, is physical fitness important for firefighting? Well, yeah, universally people would say, yeah, absolutely. Well, so do you have a fitness plan? Yeah, a lot of people have a fitness plan. Is the mental game, is mental fitness important for firefighting? Would say, probably people would say, absolutely, that's really important too. So do you have a plan? Do you have a practice that you put in place that maintains your capacity to be mentally fit, mentally ready? And then there's just kind of, you can hear the crickets. Because there's just a lot of people are saying, no. It's like, well, how can you expect that it's just going to be there? So it's because there are things that enhance it and there are things that erode it. And some of those things are outside of your control, and some of those things are actually within your control. And so if you're like any good first responder, there's tons, any scene that you're going into, there's lots that's uncontrollable. But if you really have a clear understanding of how to control the controllables, then you can go in with sort of better prepared and able to negotiate or bring about better outcomes in many cases. It's the same thing with your mental health. There's lots of stuff we can't control, but if you understand the levers, if you really understand the things that you can control, then you up the chances that you're going to be able to put in a good performance and carry your experience as well. And you're actually going to be able to carry each other. So as a team, you're going to be able to create the team ingredients that create high performance and that actually enhance all of your resilience.
Such an important message. Such an important message right there. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all you said there. I think going back to, the benefits of having a mental health program in place and having that integrated into operations, I think is recruitment and retention is another factor. So in the career service, it's probably becoming harder and harder to get a career job because people can work anywhere in the world now online. So the demand has definitely gone down there. It's still a very sought after job and career, but in the volunteer sector, there's also, if you're not taking care of the mental health of your volunteers, that's fire service is probably gonna be one of the first things they drop and leave to take care of their own family, their own well-being, right? So I think it's got to be on the forefront of leaders' minds for recruitment and retention as well.
And what we know from from organizational psychology research, why do people stay in the job? Right? It's not the feature. It's the culture.
Yes.
Culture keeps people.
Yep.
And people often report what are the peak experiences of our life. It's very often the moments of our life that we got to be a part of some kind of really cohesive team working on something together. We are wired for relationship, and those experiences where we have a real sense of belonging and shared purpose, those are actually peak experiences. Those are peak human experiences that they speak to all of us. Collectivist goals are far more motivating than individualistic goals. Just like if you're in seeking affirmation, admiration, and acceptance, it's far less motivating at a core level than having collectivist goals of really belonging and having a sense of shared meaning and purpose, and really contributing to a learning environment where the team can continuously improve and enhance its ability. There's a wonderful study, O'Neill and Rothbard did a study on East Coast fire holes, looking at a variety of factors. And what did they find? They found that these crews overwhelmingly preferred, sort of solution-focused coping or problem-focused coping versus emotion-focused So people wanted to solve the problem where rather than deal with the emotion, there was a tendency for kind of stoicism or suppression of emotional response. There's also a culture of kind of joviality. This kind of it's kind of prototypical, often male environment of pranks and good natured, like of jokes and pranks and doing that kind of thing. But there was this other quality that there was crews that also had this deep sense of companionate care, their awareness of each other, where everybody knew what was going on for somebody at home and the challenges that were there, or somebody was having a bad day and they just needed to be looked out for and carried, and your load needed to be lightened. And they were looking out for each other in a different way. And so you still had all of that kind of problem-focused coping versus emotion-focused, this emotional suppression, this kind of pranks and good-natured humor. But there was a change in the humor because because they cared for each other, it would never cross the line to become kind of weaponized where all of a sudden it became just nasty. It became about excluding, about targeting people, about taking them down. And people would go, sorry, that sounded a lot, it sounded a lot funnier in my head than what I said. And I'm really sorry about that. I shouldn't have said that. And people got redos, but they were looking out for each other. And it was this phenomenal finding that came out of this, because in those crews where you had that companionate care, this real concern. So it's not the captain looking out to make sure everybody's okay. Everybody's taking responsibility to make sure everybody's okay. There's not one person's eyes on the crew. There's, if it's a crew of 5, there's 5 people's eyes on 5 people. And what happens? In those crews, you get faster response time. So what does that got to do with? But the cohesive team responds faster. You get lower accidents. You get more satisfying family life. You get better heart health. And so all of these kind of spin-off benefits that seem to be related to group cohesion. And it's not just on firefalls. We've seen this in zero risk, high liability organizations like deep sea drilling platforms, where if you can, you go from the kind of macho kind of status oriented, never admit you don't know what you're doing, take risks, all of that kind of environment that creates these massive accident rates. And when they tweak those environments to create learning environments where everybody's going to look after everybody, Shell Oil did this kind of intervention where it was a learning environment. So people had to admit, they were admitting that they didn't know, they were looking out for each other. They were kind of holding each other accountable. Listen, you got to go home. There are people who love you. You need to go home to. You just don't do that. Like, absolutely, you do not do that here. And what they found that in these crews, they had an 85% reduction in accident rate, and the production rate climbed over the industry standard. And so actually these environments where crews can be really compassionate and looking after each other and caring for each other, that's actually the ingredients for not only lower accident rates and better health and better family health. That's actually part of the ingredients for optimal performance on the job. And so if we're really interested in operational effectiveness, if we're interested in efficiency, then what we really need to attend to the environment, the context, the culture, and the inclusiveness of our teams.
Mhm. Wow. That was a lot. And that was, you're saying the words that are going through my head, because that's my dream, is to have organizations operate like that across Canada, North America, the world. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
It's also, I talk about it in terms of performance, but we also know, it's John Cassell's, stress buffering hypothesis, but it keeps on coming out in different ways that people who are socially linked actually recover better, or even in disaster. The lessons from disaster preparedness, and I think of James Sampson's work after Hurricane Katrina, community cohesion and community kind of resilience. And so, in Katrina, they found, so the transportation infrastructure was devastated. And so you had these communities that were devastated, and it was very, very difficult to get aid in afterwards. And then you had communities that had less of an impact, and they had lots of aid. And And so what would you think that the long-term mental health impacts on those communities would be? You'd think that that would correspond to the amount of aid that they get afterwards. But in actual fact, it was sometimes the opposite. And you had these communities that were devastated and got very, very little aid in. But some of those communities had better mental health outcomes long-term than some of the less impacted communities. And so it really sparked this kind of investigation about, well, why is this happening? And what researchers found, like James Sampson and others, they found was what got labeled the zip code, the zip code effect or the postal code effect, was that there was these neighborhoods where there was cohesion and where instead of stockpiling their resources and taking care of themselves as individuals, hoarding the toilet paper kind of phenomena, instead, these communities turned to each other and they shared resources. And so they discovered that you could measure this by things like, questions like, can we go next door to your neighbor and borrow an egg? Right? So neighbors who had that kind of cohesion and linkage and capacity to share resources, they took care of each other post-crisis, and their incomes were better. And so this idea that where you live and your community cohesion actually is a preventative factor and also a recovery factor post-crisis is, I think, really relevant for first responders. Because if you think about it, right, firefighters have two postal codes. They have the one where they go home to to their families, but the fire hall is the second family. It's a second postal code. And so if you have an environment, because you keep going into crisis and you don't get to choose what you're going to see, you don't get to, I'm going to sit out on this call. That's not going to wash. So you're getting exposed to these things. But what we know is that the recovery environment is actually one of the most important things in terms of how it impacts you. And that bears out from meta-analysis studies, studies across studies around who gets post-traumatic stress reactions and who recovers well. And what those studies show is it's not just, childhood's not the most, it's a factor, but it's not the most dominant factor. And the factors around the trauma itself are not the most determining factors. That the thing that is the most important in determining who recovers and who's impacted are the factors in the recovery environment. It's the post-trauma environment. And the really cool thing about that is that that's actually the factor that we have the most control over. We can't go back and deal with somebody's childhood. We can't choose the call that you're going to go. But the recovery environment, that's one that you could actually strategically and actively shape in order to create a restorative environment where people have the space and the time and the relationships to heal and recovery.
Such an important part, because I don't think many people talk about that part of the PTSD or the trauma journey is the post. And that is, like you say, that's a part that we have control over on how to do that. So kind of brings to mind us, what can we do better in the recovery process to support our fellow firefighters?
Yeah, I think part of that is recognizing where stoicism works for you and where it doesn't, right? Because I think that there's a necessary suppression of emotional response, but it's just not going to serve you on the call. And you need to be able to kind of unwire, particularly the reverse gear emotions of fear or disgust, those things that make us recoil from a scene, from an environment. Those things we need to be able to suppress those in order to go forward and do the job. But if you're still suppressing all of that emotion, if you are impacted, and not everybody will be impacted by a scene. Again, it's often unpredictable what will stick. But if you're impacted and you're you're continuing to try and suppress that in the hall, or once you go out of the hall into the all, into everything else of your life, then you're jamming up the kind of digestion process and integration process to be able to work through the emotion and actually integrate it and move on. And so recognizing that sort of stoic demeanor, that stoic stance works in one place, but it's also unnecessarily restrictive. And if we go back to the hall and we're continuing to try and be impermeable, unaffected by anything we see, and we're afraid to put our hand up and say, did anybody else find that really jarring? Did anybody else get taken to their knees by that one? If we're unable to say that because we're terrified that we're going to raise questions in our peers about our competence and our ability to perform, if we can instead create space and say, well, what's good for there is not necessarily something that should be pulled into the hall, so that we can create space for people to come forward and talk things through and be seen and heard and understood, so that they have a recovery environment. Then that actually is like, it's a very important quality. So I think the inability to take the armor off after the call becomes restrictive, and it also perpetuates a myth. If you're not talking about the impact of what's going on, then you're perpetuating it. Your silence perpetuates the myth for everybody else that nobody's affected. And so what happens when we suppress and we suppress the impact is eventually, the accumulation gets so great that it starts to, there's a containment failure. My colleague psychologist, Dr. Kevin Luke, makes the analogy, between emotional suppression and the buildup and containment loss. It's like, try drinking water and not going to the bathroom. It's like, you can't go to the bathroom, but so drink a little bit more water. And it's just, there's not a good time to go to the bathroom. So just drink a little bit more, then drink a little bit more, and drink a little bit more. And it's pretty uncomfortable, but if you ignore it, it goes away until finally you get a containment loss. And eventually your bladder doesn't care whether you're sitting in a restaurant or on a call or whatever. It's just there's a containment failure, and now it's all coming out. And it's like, so be careful about how long you suppress. There needs to be a place to integrate, to express the right emotion at the right time. Have that seen, heard, and understood by somebody who gets it, so that you can kind of complete that cycle and move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such wise words. When you're speaking about that, it kind of makes me think about in the fire service, there's the command and control time when we are, as incident commanders, we're in control. We make decisions, take very little input when we're life and death decision-making time under a time crunch. But then there's also a time when you're back at the fire station and you can have a much more democratic discussion about things, much more involved with people. So there's a time to turn it on and a time to turn it off, just like stoicism, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that, military troops who work in elite small teams, and this wonderful saying that emerges of rank has its place, but rank also knows its place, right?
Yeah.
So that there's this kind of this time for rank and command and control, but there's also this time for recognition and to treat everybody as the same and interchangeable, right? And also this time when you recognize the diversity in your crew. And then some people they come in with different experiences. The one's a teacher, or one's a Red Seal mechanic, and one has training in air conditioning or whatever it is, right? And then there's this profound amount of knowledge that can inform your decision making, and so that command can place other people in command for a moment based on the amount of knowledge. And so this kind of moving people around, that's actually the characteristic of elite teams.
Yeah.
Right. So how much can we integrate that?
Yeah, I'd agree. Fascinating discussion. I'd like to give you the opportunity to share one amazing golden nugget to take away for our listeners today. What's something you want to share and make sure that our listeners walk away with today?
We can all take responsibility for each other. I mean, when we think about leadership, we think about the roots of the word. It's an old Indo-European word from Ledenir, which is literally it's the threshold of the doorway from one room to the next. And so leadership is really this idea of stepping out. It's stepping forward, stepping from one place into the next. And so leadership, we often confuse it with rank or management. But in actual fact, leadership is something that you can take at any place in an organization. And one way of thinking about it is, who are you on your team? And what are you striving? Who are you striving to be? Are you striving to be the MVP? Like, are you the all-star who's so competent that you make everybody else feel insecure? Right? Is that a contribution that you want to make to your team? Or are you actually aiming to be the kind of the team? What in sports is the team captain? The person who, because of your presence, you become the glue that holds everybody in place. Who just by your presence and you elevate the play of every other player on the team. And so that's a role. If you kind of look at what's my contribution when I participate in that conversation, am I elevating the play of the other players, or am I actually excluding people? And yet, as much as I sort of emphasize we need everybody to take responsibility. If we entrust that to the official leadership, then that's putting you in a kind of helpless victim position. Don't put yourself there. You're equally accountable. You're 100% accountable for your 50% of any exchange. So take responsibility for your own sphere of influence. But also, at the same time, we also recognize that change it's not the probationer who can change the culture around the fall. Their job and their emphasis or their focus is very often just on fitting in, on earning a place at the table, on being afforded belonging within the group. And so who can actually kind of kick the space in the blocks for a different way of being? It's usually the senior people. It's usually the people who don't have anything left to prove. And so it's that place of privilege that people can actually they can model, they can talk about their own experience. They can open up the conversation and allow other people to join. And part of that is also about creating a learning environment. The after action review is not on who did it right and who did it wrong and who's to blame and who's the finger pointing. Really unconstructive. It damages the safety that's required for a really open reflection on what went well and what didn't. And on the things that didn't, how do we support that? Who's having a bad day? And how do we identify the fact that sometimes people are off their game? That's reality. We can't be on all the time. And so how do we signal to each other that, you know what, I'm off my game today. The team may need to have my back, and to be able to recognize that and really be working so that everybody gets supported. Everybody is in, both on the times when they're most on, and also they're an integral part of the team when they're also, their resilience is low, their focus is off, but they're still there doing the best of what they can do and being supported to be an integral part of that team.
Wow. What a treat to talk to you today. It's mind blowing how it's listening to a person who's not in the fire service, but knows so much about the fire service and cares so much for their well-being. It blows me away, and I'm truly humbled and grateful that you're on the show today.
I've had really good teachers. So
how can people get a hold of you, or is there any way that people can connect with you if they want to after the show?
If people are interested in the resiliency program, then they can certainly go to the BC Police Association, their police, or they can go to the BC Professional Firefighters Association. Then there's links on their website, in terms of how to get into that program if they have, or make inquiry if they want to do that. And we have a website which is being renovated now. It's called blueprint.ngo. And on the protect, so we have another part of our work which is all on fatherhood. So really looking at another place where men are able to express their care and their sort of care and concern for family or for community. And firefighting is another place where young men are socialized. It's still a primarily male occupation, but young men are oriented to and socialized to understand that putting on a uniform of different kinds is also a viable and a legitimate way of expressing care and concern for society. So that's part of what we're interested in. Blueprint is really delving into the unique contribution that men make and the way that we care for our families and our communities, and really identifying that, amplifying it, and communicating it out to have more men step forward to those roles. So on the protect page of blueprint.ngo, there's some information about the program, and also a downloadable, the 5 B's of resilience. It's a model that we developed, which is really, the 5 B's are, our blueprints, or our beliefs. How do we use our breath? How do we use our body? How do we use our behavior? And what about our bonds? Who's got our back? Those 5 B's are drawers in a toolkit that we can show with a variety of different tools to keep us resilient. And so there's information about that that's free to download. And we always welcome feedback on that as to its relevance and deployability in real time in people's lives.
Wow, such important work. Congratulations.
Thanks very much, Arjun. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. I'm dying to ask you one more question if we have time.
Sure enough.
I personally am a believer that somatic work, working with the body through trauma processing, works. It worked for me. Love to get your view as a psychologist on how the body, like there's books out there about the body keeps the score, and the body
Right.
internalizes a lot of trauma. Any thoughts there? We'll keep it short.
Yeah, I mentioned Bessel van der Kolk's work on
Yes.
the body. Yeah, it keeps the score. It's trauma involves a curing up of an ancient part of the brain that mobilizes body-mediated responses. And so it's kind of all of the fight, flight, freeze, flop, which is kind of a hyper freeze where we get, gas pedals on and the brake pedals on at the same time in the body, or shaco freeze where we go from tachycardia to bradycardia, like this kind of drop of blood pressure, drop of heartbeat. These are kind of body-mediated responses, and very, very ancient responses to an animal world. And so when we get traumatized, what does that mean? Well, in some ways, it's where something breaks our illusion of safety in the world, and all of a sudden we go from being able to navigate it with the presumption that we're safe and secure most of the time. And that's this kind of assumption that most of us need to cross the road, right? We're not locked on one side, frozen there. We walk with this presumption that nothing's going to happen to me. And when that gets shattered, those shattered assumptions of safety, we end up moving into this kind of lower brain, the very body-mediated response to the environment, which we're hardwired for, and which is really adaptive in a predator-prey environment. But then that keeps us in this kind of vigilant mode, and so we're continually dumping out adrenaline and cortisol into the system for a very body-mediated response. And so very often, if you were in a functional MRI machine and we kind of triggered you, what we see is the lights start to go off up in the cognitive language centers up here, and processing moves to these much more ancient areas. And so how do you talk yourself through trauma when the very nature of being triggered and having that kind of post-trauma response, this kind of turned on to the threat. You've moved from challenge stress to now everything's threat stress. Everything's a threat to life. So how do you talk yourself through that? Well, very often that thinking is actually inaccessible in those moments. And so the pathway in to make this come back online, to make thinking more accessible and cognitive strategies more accessible, is to actually go bottom up. It's actually to use the body to make to feed messages to that lower part of the brain that we're seeing. And so regulating your breath, slowing down your breath, changing the rate of your breath, loosening the body, working through the body, those things become very often the entry point. The friend Lionel Crowther is a firefighter who's caught in a tragic Winnipeg fire, and has dedicated so much of his life to teaching fire ground survival. And one of the acronyms that he taught me around that training is BOA. It's kind of so when you're in a crisis, and this is one of the tools. The BOA stands for breathe, orient, then act, and don't reverse them. And so what does that mean? So what are you doing? Well, you're taking a breath, long breath out. You're starting to regulate your body. You're using your breath, the body response, You're taking it out of autopilot where it's probably high and shallow. You're starting to hyperventilate. You're becoming less and less able to think clearly. You're slowing that down initially. You take a breath, you feed your brain some oxygen. You release the chemical bottleneck that's actually, you got too much oxygen stored in there and too little carbon dioxide. And now you've created a chemical bottleneck where the severity is you got lots of oxygen and you're hypoxic. You can't access the oxygen. You actually have to breathe out long in order to release that. And so you're going to breathe, and then you're going to orient. And so what are you doing? You're using your senses, body senses, to orient. You might be feeling your way. But this is the floor. This is the corner. This is like you're using your body to orient yourself to your surroundings. That's here and now, right? It's very, very grounding in this. That's the kind of practice of mindfulness, right here and now. You're taking yourself out of panic by putting yourself right in this. And then based on that, now you formulate action, right? And so even in that foreground survival acronym, if you want that to be accessible, you're going to have to drill it. But what are you doing? You're actually using your body. You're using body strategy to increase the chances that you're going to be able to think your way through rationally. So
Yep.
Body
Right.
is body and breath, very important levers for groundedness, resilience, performance, survival, all of those.
So glad you said that, because I'm a firm believer that it's two. Just like organizations and mental health should be synced, I think the mind and body should be synced as well. My personal view, because I know it's helped me through life and my struggles, and I think it's a pretty powerful modality to include. So
That's right. And I think about, the 5 B's, your blueprints, your beliefs about things, breath, body, behavior. What is it that you can do right here? How do we break it down? How do we make a small change? How do we use the thin edge of the wedge to make a change? Right? Make a small change. Don't start with the thick edge. Use a small change. Just get a little gap. And then you're going to hammer away at the end of it. But start a small change. And then bonds, like who's got your back? And very often, where do we feel most grounded? When we're seen, heard, and understood. When somebody is listening to understand versus listening to fix us or give us advice or respond in some way. With it, a lot of counseling and coaching is about hearing people really, really well. And then all of a sudden they get clarity on their own answers. It's when we're seen and heard, very often our physiology starts to adjust. As a relationship, we know even in cohesive teams in crisis that cortisol starts to entrain, so people react together and then they start to recover together. And mother and an infant, right? Distress together, cortisol levels go up. And mom starts to calm down and leads the child. Cortisol's entrained. And so even physiologically, our bodies are cued to relationship. And so we can ground each other. Our physiological recovery is enabled by close relationships.
wow. I hope we can do part 2 someday.
You may end up with enough material here to do part 2.
Well, Dr. Shields, it's been truly an honor. I know you're a very busy person. I know you're dedicated to the fire service, and I really, really appreciate on behalf of North American Fire Service of what you're doing to help us. So I want to acknowledge you and your team and your teachers who've taught you. They've done a great job, and I just want to acknowledge your time and your knowledge today for spreading the wisdom. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Richard. Thanks for creating this platform for getting the knowledge and resources out where it belongs, in the hands of the people on the front line who are actually doing the work. So thank you for that.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Dr. Duncan Shields. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.